Adam Andrzejewski had started this organization called Open the Books. He had done forensic accounting on government, and he was a very well-respected columnist at Forbes. That was until he started writing bad stuff about Fauci.
So in 2021, we noticed that Dr. Anthony Fauci was the most highly compensated federal employee.
He was a public servant making close to $500,000.
His net worth went up by $5 million during the pandemic years. 2019, it was $7 million. By 2022, his net worth was more than $12 billion.
He's also gotten a copy of Anthony Fauci's calendar.
We launched this finding in my column at Forbes. I received a phone call from my regular editor. I was barred from writing about Anthony Fauci any longer. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with NIH for all the email correspondence, and what we found was the height of the pandemic, when Omicron was sweeping the country, these 6 powerful executives at NIH and Dr. Fauci himself, throughout the night, crafted the pushback email to Forbes. And so, rather than back my reporting, they decided to fold the column. After 8 years, 206 columns, 20 million page views, I'd been promoted to senior policy contributor at Forbes. They went silent on me, and after 10 days, I was terminated. On the day I was terminated, Forbes bent the knee to Dr. Anthony Fauci, and they penned a column that Fauci's portrait will hang in the Smithsonian Institute.
And of his many critics, the one who he couldn't get fired was Senator Rand Paul.
Government scientists like yourself who favor gain-of-function research...
I don't favor gain-of-function research in China. You are saying things that are not correct.
That was joint research between the Wuhan Institute and Dr. Barrick. You can't deny it.
And right after this hearing in May 2021, all these different emails and documents, they kept dropping in these Freedom of Information cases.
The weight of the evidence was this was a lab release.
And after all these new emails drop, he goes back in front of Rand Paul, who basically says, you perjured yourself.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement.
Gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That is
not...
not...
get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
And you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individuals. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
And while Rand Paul is grilling him during the summer of 2021, a huge development is about to happen.
In the summer of 2021, Major Joseph Murphy reached out to me and told me of the existence of what we now know is the diffuse proposal.
Joseph Murphy is in a wing of the DoD called DARPA. He's found this proposal called Diffuse. Diffuse is written by Peter Daszak, and this is a proposal to create a virus that looks exactly like the virus that caused the pandemic 1 year before the pandemic emerged.
Wow. In Diffuse, scientists propose collecting samples from wild bat populations in Yunnan province, China, in order to engineer new pathogens.
To look for the next SARS.
Then they're going to bring them back into the lab. They're going to insert the furin cleavage site, literally. That's their intent, is to insert it.
Specifically to make the resulting virus more dangerous to humans.
They say they're going to do a lot of work at Ralph Barrick's lab, but right on the masthead of the proposal is the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
The story is that it was submitted to DARPA, which is part of the Defense Department, and the story is that the proposal was not funded and that the work was never done. 9 times out of 10, when you submit a grant proposal, you already have about 50% of the work done. So it seems surprising that nobody wanted to tell us about this.
Diffuse is so explosive and reveals so many different things that they had to have a natural origin, and the public could never find out, because once you open Pandora's box, you can't close it again.
Diffuse was the biggest break in the story thus far over 4 years.
Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Murphy risked potentially going to prison for the rest of his life to leak the diffuse proposal to me. And as a father myself, I know that he risked his freedom and his ability to be a father, and he did it because it was the right thing to do. And that's been an inspiration to me, because I believe that he has done more than any single person to shed truth on the origin of this pandemic.
Hi, this is Emily Kopp. I'm a reporter with US Right to Know.
After Diffused, Emily goes on to do some of the most comprehensive reporting about all the behind-the-scenes emails and Slack messages and secret teleconferences. A few other journalists were treating Diffused like it was a major breakthrough.
The Intercept covered the story quite carefully, and they particularly covered the Diffused proposal.
But I'm confused. Where's the New York Times on this? Like, where's the Washington Post? And when accomplished scientists like Alina Chan picked up the reporting and wrote a book like Viral, she did an interview saying she was harassed.
People called me a race traitor.
And when the Great Barrington Declaration questioned lockdowns, scientists like Jay Bhattacharya were alienated from the science community.
Fauci created an illusion of consensus.
Scientists were being censored on social media. And when Elon Musk was taking over Twitter, he released the Twitter files, which confirmed that Fauci and the Biden administration were censoring users. Fauci ended up getting sued by 2 states for stuff related to this. And he does this deposition that's, you know, laughable.
I don't recall. I don't recall. I don't recall. I might have. I don't recall.
He gives the same answer over and over again.
I don't recall. I do not recall. I don't really recall.
This entire system of power that Fauci built over 50 years was crumbling in his hands.
We have breaking news from the White House. Dr. Anthony Fauci is retiring.
He is stepping down in December after more than 5 decades of public service.
Literally like a month later, the Department of Energy and the FBI both released declassified reports saying that the virus most likely was engineered in a lab.
He conveniently ducks out. He retires to try and avoid being held accountable.
In the beginning of 2023, a House committee decides to investigate this, but it's completely politicized.
Democrats that sit on this committee, they only hindered.
Which is kind of compromised from the start.
Republicans spent on advancing this partisan narrative.
And so Redfield is like the opening testimony.
You have said before that you were locked out of conversations about the lab leak by Dr. Fauci. And do you think they kept you out of the conversations because you believe COVID-19 may have come from a lab?
Yeah, I think I made it very clear in January to all of them.
I was told that the reason I wasn't included, they were going to come out with a single point of view that everyone had to agree with, and that it was clear that I wasn't going to be capable of that.
Why that?
Unfortunately, I have this bad trait that I can't get rid of. I'm honest.
And then the committee questioned people that weren't so honest, like Christian Anderson and Bob Gary.
Did either of you have any conversations with Peter Daszak while drafting Proxima Origin?
We did not. No one follows up with any tough questions and asks them, hey, that's interesting. We have it here that you were on a conference call with Peter Daszak and Ralph Barrick on February 3rd.
Dr. Gary, did you have any conversations with Dr. Daszak?
I did not.
Anderson and Gary perjured themselves before Congress. Those are felonies.
You know, you watch this hearing and no one's putting the pieces together.
No one is understanding what all these scientists have in common.
I think fundamental biology research, which includes gain-of-function research, is important.
It was so important that people did everything they could to cover it up.
New allegations this morning from an unnamed CIA whistleblower relating to the origins of COVID-19.
All of a sudden, there's this whistleblower from the CIA that comes forward.
A senior-level officer claiming the agency offered hush money to analysts to cover up their findings.
There were reports that Fauci had been in the CIA building, and it wasn't just Moderna with a conflict of interest. Apparently, Scott Gottlieb from Pfizer was also in the CIA building. What are Fauci and Pfizer doing in the CIA building? And a couple months later, Ralph Barrick agrees to do a closed-door testimony, and in the middle of the testimony, he's asked if he's a spy.
There's a question where you would source the IC, and suddenly it goes off the record, and I mean, Ralph Barrick, he basically admits that he was an intelligence source. It's all blacked out, but he's obviously talking with somebody. Them being used as intelligence sources, okay, given the fact that they all work for the Chinese and are compensated by the Chinese, I find crazy.
The weakest link here is Peter Daszak.
After the diffuse proposal was released via FOIA,
DARPA turned us down for whatever reasons DARPA had. And I want to remind the committee that this proposal was never funded and the work was never done.
But not a lot of people are taking Peter Daszak's word for it. And Rixey had done a deeper analysis of the diffuse proposal.
It wasn't until the diffuse proposal mentioned DC sign that I realized how important it was.
DC sign is about targeting D cells. D cells are immune system cells. This proposal wanted to create a virus that would confuse your immune system. And it would allow the virus to go undetected until it infected your immune system. So if they engineered it to have DC sign, what other viruses would they find this feature in?
The conspiracies that we were talking about in February 2020 were things like there are HIV inserts into the virus.
Looking back, it seems obvious.
The conspiracies that we were talking about were things like there are HIV inserts into the virus.
The HIV virus does this to people. So looking back, these HIV inserts that were part of the paper written by these Indian scientists on January 31st, they make a lot of sense now.
There were 4 unique inserts in total, and one of those inserts contained the furin cleavage site, and the other 3 contained elements from different HIV strains, and those 3 inserts allow this virus to utilize DC sign.
There is this insane probability that all of these things would happen naturally. So if you look at this paper that these Indian scientists put out, and the timeline, it's January 31st when everybody panics, right? Christian Anderson even says that he got a panic call from Fauci about the HIV inserts. And after all those teleconferences, this paper written by Pradhan et al., it was pulled down by February 3rd.
The conspiracies that we were talking about were things like there are HIV inserts into the virus.
The fuse is connecting all of these pieces. I mean, it makes sense why they would want to cover it up. It's just very damning. It's not a good look.
I found the grant to Amy Sims in the Barrick lab to use coronavirus to make HIV vaccines. So this isn't related to diffuse, but the people on diffuse included Amy Sims. When I looked at this grant, the alarm bells went off, ding, ding, ding. Finding a grant where they do put HIV bits into coronavirus is kind of eerie, yeah?
Scientists were concerned about testing a live attenuated HIV vaccine.
You know, there's a lot of this vaccine research that Fauci and other people don't want us to know about.
Vaccines, if not properly and completely inactivated, could lead to a public health disaster.
Vaccine research trying to end one pandemic could accidentally cause another one. And I found this article called SWAT Teams and Copycat Cover-Ups by Ed Hooper. Hooper had been featured in this documentary called The Origin of AIDS. Just like the wet market theory for COVID, scientists blamed HIV on Africans eating monkeys. This was called the bushmeat theory. But if you watch Hooper in this documentary, he has a completely different theory about the origin.
AIDS came about as an act of man, not as an act of God.
None of this surprises me at all, man. The more you dig, the more you find out, the less faith you have.
In the late 50s, scientists were in the Congo testing polio vaccines on Africans.
You know, polio was a horrible, debilitating disease.
Yeah.
these scientists that were doing these polio vaccine trials believed, probably in their heart of hearts, that they were doing this for humanity. And sometimes when you have that belief, you can cut corners.
You can always think you're doing good, but that don't mean you are.
Scientist named Hilary Kaprowski cultured the polio vaccine in the kidney cells of chimpanzees.
Something like HIV may have existed in primates for millions of years, but it had never had a huge outbreak in humans. During the research, other primate viruses had already contaminated the vaccines. Despite these risks, between 1957 and 59, scientists test this oral vaccine on indigenous Africans without informed consent.
It's just devilish.
For 2 years, these scientists administer millions of doses in Kinshasa. And by the end of the study in 1959, in the same city, is the first major outbreak of HIV.
It's evil.
Federal health officials say as many as 1 million Americans may have been infected with the AIDS virus.
A mystery disease known as the gay plague.
Even without any connections to the polio vaccine and the origin of AIDS, people were enraged at Reagan and Fauci for how they were handling the pandemic. Activists like Michael Petrelis even stormed the NIH.
Anthony Fauci, I piss on you. I promise you we'll give you the data. I do think there is still a conspiracy.
You are a politician.
Fauci was hated by almost all people suffering with HIV. He was arrogant and condescending.
I think that you may be naive in understanding how you can get things done in Washington.
Fauci was already under fire for failed treatments like AZT.
Abandoned cancer chemotherapy treatments that were taken off the shelf.
Then in the late 90s, the story comes out in Rolling Stone about the oral polio vaccine and connections to the origin of the pandemic.
Why and how? There were several mysteries that
Fauci was already on the rocks with the black community.
To tell us what to do, how to treat our bodies, and how to live a more...
Around this time, he was working on an AIDS vaccine. And a story about a vaccine tested on black people accidentally causing a pandemic that was ravaging the black community was not good PR for him or for science. Over the next couple years, a series of papers come out debunking the polio theory. Fauci promotes some of that work, saying that the theory was dead. The crazy coincidence is some of those papers were written by Bob Gary, Andrew Rambo, and Eddie Holmes, the same guys given a big ask right before the pandemic broke out. Anyone seeing a pattern here? It's all the same people. And they apparently have written the same type of papers for the last 20 years.
Totally consistent.
After all, viruses only come from nature. The story Fauci loves to tell.
I don't recall. I might have.
And I feel like I still don't even know the whole story. What other shit are these people covering up?
I promise you we'll give you the data.
Makes sense why they needed to get an honest guy like Redfield out of the room. This doesn't seem like the place for honesty.
I think that you may be naive in understanding how you can get things done in Washington.
And when it came to getting things done in Washington, Tony Fauci was masterful. He always knew how to get his way, and he always knew how to cover his tracks. So after decades of being called in front of Congress, there was no big surprises.
The accusation being circulated that I tried to cover up the possibility that the virus originated from a lab. In fact, the truth is exactly the opposite.
Was CDC Director Redfield on that call?
Some tough questions.
Redfield's lying through the committee when you sat right where you sat?
Really? Really?
Wow.
There were some fireworks.
Mr. Fauci.
Some unhinged emotions.
Dr. Fauci, did you ever treat a patient for COVID during the pandemic?
We didn't take care of many of them.
Okay, so not hands-on. Got it.
Some very powerful moments.
Why would I be criticized by a bureaucrat who's never treated a patient for COVID? You can read all the things you want, but you're not there. You're not seeing patients. You're not watching people die, intubating patients right there.
My mom was a healthcare worker during the pandemic. My mom died of COVID. My stepfather died of COVID. I lost both of my parents.
But nothing really changed in this story.
My opinion is that you are an American hero.
And what we have found is the following. Dr. Fauci did not fund research that caused the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Fauci did not lie about gain-of-function research, and Dr. Fauci did not orchestrate a campaign to suppress the lab leak theory.
He did not lie to Congress.
Unsubstantiated. Unsubstantiated.
This is crazy.
It's the most unfair thing I have seen.
No evidence.
No evidence.
What?
The evidence to date points to COVID-19 having originated from an animal market in China.
What planet are these people on? I mean, this whole thing is a joke.
He should be tried for mass murder, and he should be tried for...
Our system is like professional wrestling.
After that hearing, that's how the American people feel.
Dr. Fauci has had an honorable career as he and his colleagues helped us save millions of lives.
Does there need to be accountability for Dr. Fauci?
This hearing demonstrated that he's being held accountable, but they have no evidence he did anything wrong.
Congressman, I'm just concerned that there is evidence and that it's being overlooked. There's evidence of research that has been happening for almost 20 years that is very dangerous to humanity. If we saved 2 million people with a vaccine, but we lost 20 million people, this is a bad thing for humanity. I'm very concerned.
Send me
I
that
have a lot of that I could
Like Dr.
send.
Fauci said, he has an open mind on it, and I think
He didn't,
we all
though.
should have an open mind.
You cited the CDC director. The CDC director was locked out of conversation starting on January 31st. We're losing the plot, I feel.
We're open to all the
I hope you are.
evidence.
I hope you are.
It's so disturbing.
It's really disturbing. This whole process has been demoralizing. But right around the time of the hearing, Adam Andrzejewski had gotten all this new data about the royalties that the NIH received from Big Pharma during the pandemic.
$690 million worth of third-party royalties. Those are payments from pharmaceutical companies back to Fauci's institute. It calls into question whether these decisions were made in the special interest of Anthony Fauci and his institute. It's an open question. It's not answered yet, but the truth will come out.
A few weeks after this interview, before Adam even got a chance to release that information, Adam inexplicably died in his sleep.
The cause of death is unknown. Hope, for his family's sake, they get the answers.
Right. But totally healthy man. Marathon runner.
And he's reporting on the royalty payments from pharmaceutical companies and died in his sleep.
We don't know how Adam died, but we do know that these pharmaceutical companies have made a lot of money from this pandemic. After Moderna had taken in close to $50 billion from the vaccines, sales started flattening out.
One of your main revenue drivers is no longer there. You have to find new ways of running the company.
By 2024, Stefan Bunzel was doing a lot of press about the future of Moderna.
But the piece also we should look at is long COVID.
Long COVID is a very complicated condition. It's quite serious.
Currently being treated.
It can present itself in many different ways.
Rixie's had long COVID since 2020.
I was really sick when I got COVID, and ever since then, I've been hit with neurological, cardiological, and immune dysregulation symptoms.
One of the patients I saw today, when she came to see me 2.5, 3 years ago, she came on a stretcher. She had so much autonomic dysfunction from COVID, she couldn't sit up.
There's research suggesting that the furin cleavage site may be toxic to liver and lung cells, and if there are HIV inserts in the virus, it would explain autoimmune problems.
I also have a number of patients that have post-COVID symptoms from the mRNA vaccine.
After I got the vaccine, symptoms have been exacerbated. My physical health has declined dramatically.
Do you have any concern about the side effect profile?
He's talking about mRNA side effects like myocarditis and blood clots, and they aren't the only side effects.
A lot of negative side effects for...
There's a lot of chatter on the internet right now about these turbo cancers. It's been dismissed as anti-vax, but all these scientists have been going through the genetic information, and they found 19 characters. When you reverse them, they are a 2016 patent from Moderna for MSH3. Apparently a key component in fighting the mutations that cause cancer.
Which is why the cancer has been growing.
And Bunzel certainly isn't talking about that in his interviews. A cancer mutating gene patented by his company that may have been found in the virus.
Oncology could in a few years actually become more
and this potential surge in turbo cancers after the pandemic.
I think the chance we have is we have a platform.
Instead, he's on CNBC talking about how cancer is about to make Moderna a lot of money.
We're going to get the company back into sales growth. We're going to get towards 26 to 1.
And it's completely horrifying. So I figured I'd write Fauci one last email. I told him what I really care about is all this dangerous research, the stuff he said was a risk worth taking, and this Pandora's box that he's opened up, creating this terrifying dystopian future. So thank you, Dr. Fauci, for that. And I did get a response, but not from him, from his lawyer, who is a heavyweight attorney who has represented like 3 presidents, who basically said that Tony is just too busy with his book, and he's not going to be able to do the interview. So that is that. So now I'm just listening to his epilogue while getting my car washed.
Epilogue. I certainly could not anticipate that I would become a political lightning rod.
And he seems pretty aware of how he changed society.
I became a symbol of the profound divisiveness in our country. A figure who represents hope to so many and evil to some.
He does seem pretty aware about how he changed society, but from the perspective of a man living in an alternate universe, where none of this was problematic and nothing he did was bad. And for some reason, half of the mainstream media in the United States still praises him, which makes 0 sense.
He is our special guest tonight with the new book, On Call. It's good to see you in person.
Same here.
This is Fauci's last moment to wallow in the limelight.
Have you thought about running for president?
No.
No interest whatsoever.
And egomaniacs like Anthony Fauci really excelled at that.
Fauci, it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I mean, it's almost like he's delusional or something.
I don't think he's been gifted with looking in the mirror and seeing what's actually there right now. I think he's convinced himself that he's kind of above it all.
Well, remember this day.
I rewatched Oppenheimer the other day as he was struggling with the reality of what he created, a weapon that could destroy the world.
With viruses, it's like that on steroids. This research may have killed 200 times as many people as Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
There's a whole lot of nothing going on in Washington, D.C., you know, and I don't think that that's acceptable.
It's just a slap in the face to everyone who lost a loved one or lost a business or lost a milestone in their life to this pandemic.
People died in every country, of every age, and whether it was from the virus or the ridiculously insane responses to the virus, most of it was wrong. And that's what matters.
We know now that governments lie. And the reason that they lie is because they want to cover up government screw-ups.
Just handed the Chinese this technology for access to their laboratory, which is probably the greatest failure in military history. I think the only way forward is a military tribunal to hold the long list of bad actors accountable.
Those individuals likely caused a pandemic that killed 20 million people and cost $25 trillion.
I think Anthony Fauci should go to jail, honestly. But, you know, that alone won't do anything if we continue to allow this kind of biodefense research.
We have a right to make mistakes, but where I get upset is if we don't acknowledge our mistakes so we don't make the same mistake next time.
Fauci knew and lied repeatedly.
I gave it 110% every day.
Fauci's legacy is bullshit.
Making pathogens more deadly is an existential threat to humanity, and it should be stopped. That's not happening.
There have been no new safety regulations and no new laws implemented. Nothing.
They're actually building up more labs now.
Dr. Fauci claims that they're creating more dangerous viruses in the lab to predict a pandemic or to prevent one. It's never happened. It's a fantasy.
Biodefense may be the greatest euphemism ever for biowarfare.
The truth needs to be told.
It's not just that COVID came from a lab, because we might not ever definitively know that. It's about what people don't want you to find out along the way.
That we are often
pawns in a war that we know nothing about.
There are research projects that could kill half the planet if there was an accident. One that only killed a tiny fraction of the population, collapsed global economies, destabilizing the population to the brink of civil war, shut down schools, locked down homes, forced everyone onto new technologies where their data is being monitored, controlled the media, censored scientists and doctors, mandated gene-altering drugs into our bloodstream despite the damage they could cause, while trillions of dollars moved from the poor to the rich in the largest transfer of wealth in modern history. And if that much power and that much wealth and that much social control can be generated by one minor pandemic, this is only the beginning.
The great pandemic is coming. Going to be a bird flu pandemic.
New concerns this morning over bird flu.
For bird flu in Michigan.
Bird flu
virus. Red.
It's going to be a major pandemic. That's coming.
I'm kind of freaked out about this, man.
Oh, the bird flu thing? Take a deep breath. If it was from a lab, we'd already be dead by now.